before the Pittsburgh Steelers became a dynasty, before Super Bowl trophies, Hall of Fame speeches, and legendary names. There was a moment in Steelers history that time quietly moved past. In the early 1970s, the NFL was changing, but not everyone was ready for that change. And in Pittsburgh, a young quarterback stepped onto the field, carrying more than just a playbook. Joe Gilliam wasn't just trying to win games. He was trying to prove he belonged. He was trying to lead. And he was trying to succeed in a league that offered very little patience to players like him. In 1974, Joe Gilliam became the first black quarterback to start a season opener for the Pittsburgh Steelers, a historic moment that should have been celebrated forever. Instead, it quietly faded away. This is not a story of anger. It's not a story of blame. It's a story of pressure, expectations, and what happens when a system isn't ready to protect the people inside it. Welcome to Black and Gold Legacy, where we preserve the stories that shaped Steelers history, even the ones that were left behind. If you care about football, history, and the human side of the game, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so these stories are never forgotten again. Today, we tell the story of a quarterback who stood at the edge of greatness and paid a heavy price for being first. This is the story of Joe Gilliam. Early life, born into football. Joe Gilliam's relationship with football began long before he ever stepped onto a field as a player. He was born into a family where football was not just a sport, but a responsibility. His father, Joe Gilliam Sr., was a highly respected coach and educator, best known for building a disciplined and successful program at Tennessee State University. Inside the Gilliam household, football was treated as a craft, something that demanded preparation, intelligence, and leadership. Joe was raised with high expectations from the very beginning. There was no special treatment. Mistakes were corrected. Discipline was non-negotiable. From a young age, he was taught how to read defenses, understand formations, and take responsibility for teammates. Quarterback was never seen as just a position. It was seen as a leadership role that carried accountability. That upbringing shaped the way Joe played the game. He was never flashy or reckless. He didn't rely on improvisation or emotion. He played with calm, control, and intelligence. At a time when black quarterbacks were often viewed as athletes first and leaders second, Joe Gilliam was being trained specifically to run an offense. He studied playbooks, protections, and decision-making long before most players his age were trusted with those responsibilities. The pressure placed on him at home was heavy, but it prepared him. Joe Gilliam didn't grow up dreaming of being a quarterback. He grew up being prepared to become one. That foundation would carry him forward, into college football, into the NFL, and eventually into a moment of history that few were ready for. College stardom at Tennessee State. When Joe Gilliam arrived at Tennessee State University, he wasn't just joining a football program. He was stepping into a legacy his own family had helped build. Tennessee State was one of the most respected HBCU football programs in the country, and expectations were already high. Being the coach's son only raised them further. Every throw Joe made, every decision on the field, was scrutinized more closely than most players would ever experience. But Joe Gilliam didn't shy away from that pressure. As the starting quarterback, he quickly proved that he belonged. He ran the offense with discipline and efficiency, showing strong decision-making, leadership, and poise under pressure. His style wasn't about highlight plays. It was about control. He understood the system, trusted his teammates, and kept the offense moving. During his college career, Gilliam helped lead Tennessee State to multiple winning seasons and conference championships, establishing himself as one of the most reliable quarterbacks in the program's history. What separated Joe from many quarterbacks of his era was his command of the game. Coaches trusted him to make adjustments at the line of scrimmage, read coverages, protect the football. These were qualities NFL teams claimed to value, yet often hesitated to trust in quarterbacks who looked like him. Despite strong performances and leadership at the college level, Joe Gilliam did not receive the national attention that many quarterbacks from larger programs enjoyed. His success was often overlooked, dismissed, or confined to HBCU conversations rather than broader NFL discussions. Still, his talent was undeniable. By the time he left Tennessee State, Joe Gilliam had done everything asked of him. He had won games, led teammates, and proven his football intelligence. The question was no longer whether he could play quarterback. It was whether the NFL was ready to give him the opportunity. That answer would begin to unfold on draft day. Drafted by the Steelers, a historic opportunity. In 1972, Joe Gilliam entered the NFL draft carrying more than just college success. He carried history with him. The Pittsburgh Steelers, a franchise still searching for its identity, selected Joe Gilliam in the 11th round. On paper, it looked like a routine draft pick. In reality, it was something far more significant. Joe Gilliam became one of the first black quarterbacks drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, and one of the few in the league given a legitimate chance to compete for the position at that time. Pittsburgh in the early 1970s was not yet the dynasty fans know today. The team was rebuilding under head coach Chuck Noll, who was focused on discipline, structure, and talent over reputation. Noll believed in competition, at least in principle. Gilliam entered a quarterback room that included Terry Bradshaw, the former #1 overall pick, who was still struggling to find consistency, and veteran backups who were seen as safer options. What made Gilliam's situation unique was that, for the first time, the Steelers openly allowed a black quarterback to compete seriously in training camp, not as a gimmick, not as a conversion project, but as a quarterback. And Joe Gilliam earned it. During training camp and preseason, Gilliam impressed coaches with his command of the offense, calm presence, and ability to move the team. He didn't force plays. He didn't panic. He played efficient, controlled football, exactly what Chuck Noll valued. His performances were strong enough that the Steelers made a historic decision. For the 1974 season, Joe Gilliam was named the Steelers' starting quarterback, becoming the first black quarterback to start a season opener for the franchise, and one of the first in modern NFL history to hold that role without conditions attached. It was a groundbreaking moment, but it was also a fragile one. The expectations were enormous, the margin for error was razor thin, and the scrutiny was unlike anything his teammates faced. Every incomplete pass was magnified. Every loss raised questions that went beyond football. Joe Gilliam had been given an opportunity, but the leash was short, and the pressure that came with making history would soon test him in ways few quarterbacks ever experience. A short window under heavy pressure. Joe Gilliam's opportunity with the Pittsburgh Steelers was historic, but it was also fragile. When the 1974 season began, Gilliam was not just trying to win football games. He was navigating pressure that extended far beyond the field. Every throw, every decision, every mistake was evaluated under a microscope few quarterbacks had ever faced. The Steelers were a young team with growing expectations, and the offense was still finding its rhythm. Gilliam showed flashes of composure and leadership, but consistency was difficult to maintain. The margin for error was extremely small. Unlike other quarterbacks who were allowed time to struggle and develop, Gilliam's mistakes carried heavier consequences. As losses mounted and turnovers became more visible, criticism intensified. Media narratives shifted quickly. Questions arose not only about performance, but about whether the opportunity itself had been a mistake. Inside the locker room, Gilliam continued to work, but the environment was tightening. Confidence became harder to sustain when patience was limited. Every game felt like an audition, not for growth, but for survival. Eventually, Chuck Noll made the decision to turn back to Terry Bradshaw. It was a move rooted in stability and long-term vision, but it also marked the end of Gilliam's brief window as a starting quarterback. The opportunity that had taken years to arrive had lasted only a handful of games. For Joe Gilliam, the demotion was more than a depth chart change. It was a signal that the margin he was given had disappeared. He had been trusted to make history, but not trusted with time. And once that window closed, it would never fully reopen. Benched, replaced, and pushed aside. Once Joe Gilliam lost the starting role, his position within the Pittsburgh Steelers changed rapidly and permanently. After Terry Bradshaw reclaimed the quarterback job, the direction of the franchise became clear. The Steelers were moving forward with their former #1 overall pick, and Gilliam's role diminished almost immediately. What followed was not a gradual transition, but a sharp one. Gilliam found himself sliding down the depth chart, receiving fewer practice reps and less attention from the coaching staff. The competition that once existed quietly disappeared. The message, while never stated outright, was understood. His opportunity had passed. Despite continuing to prepare and remain professional, Gilliam was no longer viewed as part of the team's future plans at quarterback. The Steelers were building towards something historic, and stability at the position became the priority. By the end of the season, Gilliam was released. It was a quiet exit. No press conferences, no public explanation, no acknowledgement of the history that had been made. While the team went on to win Super Bowl IX and launch a dynasty, Gilliam's role in that chapter was largely erased from the narrative. For Joe Gilliam, the emotional weight was heavy. He had broken barriers, earned the trust of a coaching staff, and handled pressure few others experienced, only to be pushed aside without closure. The door that had briefly opened was now firmly closed. And unlike others who struggled early in their careers, he would not be given another extended opportunity elsewhere. The league moved on, but the impact of what had happened to Gilliam would stay with him long after football was gone. Life after the Steelers. Once Joe Gilliam's time in Pittsburgh came to an end, his NFL career never truly recovered. He was traded to the New Orleans Saints, a team still struggling to find stability at quarterback. The change of scenery was supposed to offer a fresh start, but the opportunity never fully materialized. Gilliam saw limited action, and the league's confidence in him continued to fade. For a quarterback who had once been trusted to lead the Steelers, the drop-off was sudden and difficult. After leaving the NFL, Gilliam faced something many former players struggle with: life without football. The game that had structured his life, defined his identity, and given him purpose was suddenly gone. Without strong support systems in place, his life began to unravel. Gilliam battled personal struggles, including issues with substance abuse. The pressure of unrealized expectations, combined with the loss of direction, took a heavy toll on his mental and emotional health. Unlike many stars of his era, Joe Gilliam didn't transition into coaching, media, or public recognition. He lived largely out of the spotlight, carrying a story that few people remembered, and even fewer understood. In 2000, Joe Gilliam passed away at just 49 years old. His death marked a quiet ending to a life that once stood at the center of history. But the story doesn't end there, because what Joe Gilliam represented mattered far beyond wins and losses. Legacy: why Joe Gilliam still matters. Joe Gilliam's NFL career was short, and his time as a starter was even shorter. But legacy isn't always measured by length, statistics, or championships. Sometimes, legacy is measured by what had to happen first. Joe Gilliam was the first black quarterback to start a season opener for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That alone places him in NFL history, not as a footnote, but as a barrier breaker. At a time when black quarterbacks were rarely trusted to lead, rarely given patience, and rarely protected by systems built for their success, Gilliam carried expectations no rookie quarterback should ever have to bear alone. He wasn't just playing against defenses. He was playing against doubt. What makes his story important today is not how it ended, but what it revealed. His journey exposed how fragile opportunity can be, especially when timing, trust, and support disappear. In later years, the NFL slowly began to change. Quarterbacks who looked like Joe Gilliam were finally given chances, time to grow, and organizations willing to invest in them. That progress did not come from nowhere. It came because players like Gilliam stood at the front, often without protection, and paid a personal cost. Among Steelers fans and football historians, Joe Gilliam is now remembered with respect and sadness, not criticism. He is seen as a player who carried history on his shoulders and never truly had the chance to put it down. His story reminds us that not every pioneer gets to enjoy the future they helped create. And that is exactly why his name deserves to be remembered. Not for failure, but for courage. Joe Gilliam's story was never meant to be forgotten. It was simply left behind. He didn't get a long career. He didn't get patience. And he didn't get the protection that so many others before and after him were given. But what he did get, and what can never be taken away, is his place in history. Joe Gilliam stood at a moment when change was difficult, when expectations were heavy, and when the system wasn't ready for someone like him to succeed. He carried that weight quietly. He carried it alone, and he paid a price that few ever truly understood. Today, we remember Joe Gilliam not for how his career ended, but for what his courage made possible. This has been Black and Gold Legacy, where we honor the stories that shaped Steelers history, even the ones that time tried to move past. If this story mattered to you, please like, share, and subscribe, so these voices are never lost again. Because history only survives when someone is willing to tell it, and Joe Gilliam's story deserves to be told.